Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stoliarov II, and I am the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our U.S. Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon of January 21st, 2024. Today we have a fascinating conversation in store for you on philosophy, on longevity, on various interdisciplinary questions that I think form essentially the essence of the kinds of discussions we like to have at our virtual enlightenment salons. Before we delve into our salon, I would encourage everyone who has not done so yet to vote for Tom Ross, our U.S. Transhumanist Party presidential candidate, in a poll that is hosted by the Free and Equal Elections Foundation. You can go to vote.freeandequal.org and cast your ballot. It is a ranked choice voting poll where you can select up to 6 candidates. We would encourage you to rank Tom as your first choice because the top 6 winners of this poll will qualify to participate in the February 29th debate that will be hosted by the Free and Equal Elections Foundation in Los Angeles. And we think it would be a great opportunity to get Tom onto that debate stage. So today we are joined by our panel of U.S. Transhumanist Party officers, including our Director of Visual Art, Art Ramon Garcia, our Director of Longevity Outreach, Ben Ballweg, and our Legislative Director, Jason Geringer. And our guest today is Amy Baum. Amy is a modern-day philosopher who is spirited by curiosity, truth-seeking, and creating. Growing up in a big family and having a background in childcare have provided her with unique perspectives on social sciences and the human condition. She graduated in the field of audiovisual production and journalism, often covering topics within the sciences and the longevity space for over a decade. So, Amy, welcome to our salon. And to begin with, could you please tell us a bit about your intellectual journey, how you became involved in the field of longevity and some interesting experiences you've had in that field, perhaps some people you've had the opportunity to meet and gain insights from. Let us know essentially how you got from the beginning to where you are right now.
Wow. Okay. Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, intellectual journey. It's interesting. Growing up, I was seemingly struggling with academia. I failed kindergarten twice, if that's possible. Apparently it is. So they held me back. First grade as well. They wanted to hold me back, but I realized at that point it was ridiculous. Had ADHD, dyslexia, other things. Eventually learned to read and write, which actually, I think from struggling in the beginning, it was kind of what motivated me to be as curious as I was and want to pursue, more academic knowledge and being able to read and write even stronger and challenge myself from, having struggled with it in the beginning. And so from there, I mean, it was always, I was always curious about all kinds of things. I was experimenting, always learning. And then it occurred to me to go to school for journalism and audiovisual production because I wouldn't have to abandon, or it seemed like I wouldn't have to abandon any of these various interests that I was dabbling in. And I could kind of have also that rush of being able to be in a different environment and be outside sometimes, inside in different places on a different day. It wasn't a 9 to 5. It wasn't the same place every day, the same people every day, which would have been very limiting for me and my restless nature. And so it finally occurred to me to do this. I could talk to all of these smarter people, and I didn't mind being the least smartest person in the room as long as I was still learning. So went to school for AV, which also helped foster my creativity as well, which I didn't want to abandon. So again, it seemed like the perfect amalgamation of things together to go to school for. Shortly after graduating, I was working with the Libertarian Party. At the time, I was the secretary of the Libertarian Party, which is actually how I met Bill Falloon. I met him through his sons, and they were sort of interested in libertarian philosophies or somehow engaging with them due to their endeavors with fighting the FDA and so forth, as you know, for medical sovereignty and so forth. And they said they needed an AV tech over at the Church of Perpetual Life. For those of you who don't know, it is a foundation, a science-based church in South Florida, funded by Bill Falloon, and even helped, Aubrey de Grey helped initiate it as well. And they do have a prophet, Nikolai Fedorov. Maybe some of you know him. He is a futurist. I think he was a self-proclaimed transhumanist technically.
He was
But
a Russian cosmist. This was kind of before transhumanism became a philosophy. But yes, he was a proto-transhumanist, at least we like to call him that.
there you go, exactly. But he was also faith-based to a degree. I know that he believed in maybe sort of allegoric spirit or faith-based principles that he also still had, and or metaphysics that interested him as well. So they wanted to develop a community in South Florida based off some of his principles and philosophies that incorporated futurism and technologies for prolonging lifespan and health span, but also a place that still felt like congregation, and a place where maybe you didn't have to abandon some of the faith-based principles that you might have um, a sensitivity for or sentimentality for. So yeah, so I met them through there, and at first it was just a job. I was just going to be their AV tech. I was excited that it was science and that I was going to be learning science, but I wasn't necessarily at all interested in immortality, of course, and those things that really seemed unachievable to me at the time as well. This was 2013, I think. And definitely interested in prolonging health span, but at the time, and technically lifespan, but things like escape velocity and death is wrong and death to death and uploading our consciousness and Neuralink, and the things that the areas that typically people have apprehensions about, or the questions of overpopulation and the ethical questions about transhumanism. I had all of those standard questions and reluctancy, and slowly, very, very slowly, over 10 years of working there, I got brainwashed. But I was introduced to a lot of concepts that I hadn't, and through also engaging in the social hall after every presentation, I would go out into the social hall and engage and talk to everyone. And I was able to kind of change my mind a little bit about some of the ideas and philosophies. And I've definitely come to a place with transhumanism where I realized that I do believe it is an inevitable part of human evolution to continue to, by all means necessary, as long as it's non-aggressive toward anyone else, of course, to try to advance the health and happiness of humanity. And this would involve technologies and machines, of course, and even AI, to achieving a healthier and longer lifespan. I think that's should be part of the human impetus. I see no reason to think otherwise.
Excellent. Well,
So
yes,
that's
yes.
yeah, that's
I just
yeah.
wanted to say I'm glad that you had this perhaps lengthy intellectual journey toward the acceptance of transhumanist ideas and toward essentially recognizing that indefinite longevity was feasible and desirable. Do you think there was a particular moment in time when this clicked for you, or did it just dawn on you very gradually?
Um, I would say it was probably more gradual, and honestly, I think that's also because I think so many people in the space, and without making this seem like I'm being negative, but a lot of the conversations I would have with people in the longevity community did seem to be, they were less neutral in terms of joining mysticism with science, or spirituality with rational, you know um, more science-based, like using the scientific method, whereas embracing certain unknown concepts that are mysterious. And there was definitely a very like reluctancy to consider the unknown elements of human consciousness and areas that are considered maybe spiritual or pseudosciences that I've actually spent a lot of time with that really interest me. And I found that, I guess, maybe a little boring. Psychedelic topics. I felt like there was a lack of experience with having these lucid states, or having a psychedelic journey, or a journey where they were able to, or a transcendental experience. And so I felt like maybe there was a disconnect there, and that was, and it seemed almost like, okay, is this movement just for the self? Is this just like a the individual experience of how can I expand my abilities, my mental abilities, and enhance my mental capacities, whatever, and also physical and so forth, for the physiological evolution and so forth. But rather, I never really heard a lot about ways to eradicate, the issues within humanity that are just based on survival, that could, once we eradicate those mortality issues, whether it's medical and injury and so forth, or for eliminating catastrophe and accidents and all of this through technology and through AI and so forth, so would still again be aligned with transhumanism. Once we are closer to that goal, it's going to make more sense for us to evolve as a species to be closer to a more altruistic species. We won't have to, rely on some of these impulses and some of these decisions that we have to make that unfortunately are, unfair to either other species or to the planet, to other people. I feel like I got sidetracked from what I was saying, but how I came to change my mind. Yeah, so it was slowly over time that I realized, regardless of if I felt like I was relating with the average person I was speaking to in the community, about their interests, about um, consciousness beyond this physical form and so forth, that ultimately, and as a libertarian, I was never going to stand in anyone's way, anyways. But it started to make more and more sense to me that this was an inevitable part of human evolution. And I just started to get more excited by it. I also think with getting older, naturally, I think when you're younger too, you feel impervious to consequence and you have less of an abundance of caution. It's kind of just like, that more fervor of youth. When you start getting older and feeling like, damn, I'm running out of time for this, or I'm running out of time for that, which I didn't think was going to happen to me, like for me to actually change my mind for those reasons. But I did, because it seems ironic that the more sapient we become, the more wisdom we gain, the more peace we finally have from these traumas or other things we've gone through, is also at the time we're at this pinnacle of like more peace and more wisdom than ever. But it's also around the same time that we are having, health degeneration to some degree, whether it's our joints or even our eyes from staring at our phones all the time, or the list goes on. And I thought, how unfortunate and how ridiculous. Why would we evolve to be where we get better and better, mentally, spiritually, even with the information that we get to finally learn about through these new technologies that enable us to learn new things, and to also be more resourced, right? As we get older, maybe your 40s, 50s, you finally have more resources to go on this vacation or to do these hobbies that you wanted to do, but at the same time, you're not as healthy. Even with the advancements we're making with health, it's still inevitably you're not as healthy at 45 as you were at 25, most likely. And so I thought that's unfortunate. That doesn't make sense. And it would only make sense for sentient beings as humans to continue to try to change that and make it to where we can have longer, healthier lifespans, and happier ones, where we didn't have to feel like as soon as we got to the best part, it was also starting to become, we had to fight for it to keep it with all the supplements and this and that. And I didn't like that. I was like, why shouldn't we use science to fix that?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And it's interesting, a number of things you said resonated with me. First of all, I didn't exactly fail kindergarten, but I absolutely hated kindergarten in Belarus. It was most certainly the worst educational experience of my life because of the strict regimentation, the bullying and the
Mhm.
indoctrination into not quite Soviet propaganda, because the Soviet Union had already fallen at the time, but Belarusian nationalism, which was pretty much about as bad, if not worse. At least Soviet ideology was a bit more cosmopolitan. But I still detest kindergarten, and I don't think children should be sent there. Uh, Another
Well, we're
area.
doing it wrong, but yeah, yeah, I have a lot of ideas about I don't wanna for the sake of brevity, since we have so much time, I won't
Mhm.
go into that topic, but yeah, I have my theories about that.
Yes, another area of similarity, of course, is libertarianism. So I was part of the Ron Paul revolution in
Yeah.
2008 to 2012. I actually helped to elect the delegation from Nevada that then went to the National Convention, the Republican National Convention, and refused to cast what would have been the deciding ballot for Mitt Romney. And that was when the Republican establishment insiders changed the rules to essentially heavily favor the presumptive frontrunner. And their
Mhm.
reaction to Ron Paul was the reason why Donald Trump actually got the nomination so easily in 2016 and 2020, and seems to be poised to get it again. They were so afraid of Ron Paul that they essentially removed all of the safeguards that would have prevented Trump from sweeping the nomination. So at that point, I, of course, quit the Republican Party. I was only an instrumental Republican to vote for Ron Paul. And then I sought a new political home, and the Transhumanist Party ended up being that. But
Yeah.
I also think that what you stated about the tragedy of life and the fact that once we get the opportunity to really experience or undertake some of the most interesting or important endeavors in life, our health begins to fail. I've heard it said that in the course of a conventional human life, one can only have 2 out of 3 attributes at a time, which are time, money, and energy. So when one is young,
Mm,
one has time and energy, but no money. When one is middle aged, one hopefully has some money and still some energy, but no time. And when one is older, perhaps retired, one hopefully has money and hopefully has time, but no energy. And that is the tragedy, that
mm,
we can never truly fully actualize our potential while we're in this state. And we
right.
need to overcome aging. We need to reverse the course of the diseases that will otherwise afflict us in order to have a truly fulfilled life. We cannot have it with conventional lifespans today. So, I wanted to ask you a few questions about essentially some of your thoughts on more fundamental philosophical questions, and to see how you arrived at your appreciation of longevity, perhaps in conjunction with these ideas. So I think we've had these conversations before. I'm certainly more of a materialist than you are. So I think material things and physical phenomena exist, but I also think that consciousness exists and it's a product of our physical processes. So we do have this inner subjective experience that is very real. And in my view, it's an emergent property of the physical. Now, what do you think exists fundamentally? And if you think something besides the material realm exists, what is it, and how do you know or have reason to believe that it exists?
So, I actually probably agree with you more than you think in terms of fundamentally the source of many of these transcendental or metaphysics concepts do break down to a physical explanation to some degree. I just think that the way that they're perceived is different usually among people that are maybe subcategorized into like a spiritual group or so forth. And I think as we're learning more about neuroscience and also in many ways thanks to modern technology, we're learning more about neuroscience is actually uncovering some of the things that we formerly considered pseudoscience. And that's similar to the way that science fiction becomes science fact. And I think that a lot of things we were debunking as pseudoscience, we will see being reintroduced again, that we'll be re-examining as new technologies emerge. And I have a whole bunch of reasons to suspect that, which hopefully I can segue into that. But yes, I do believe in, or at least I do consider, of course, many different concepts about consciousness in terms of mastering um, uh, mental forces, not just material elements, and considering um, the things like, quantum entanglement. We've accepted that to be a fact, right? This is something that is not considered a theory. This is a fact. But when we look at things like the observer effect with the double slit experiment, I mean, this was debunked, and I think that was partially due to people misunderstanding observing really been meaning in physics, meaning the ability to measure something. But I think we'll be able to revisit things like that in time to see that there the the propensity that human beings have to influence matter, either with their thoughts or with even intentions. Um, that's why I brought up quantum entanglement. I'm probably jumping around, but existential questions make me do that. But so yeah, so I definitely I don't disagree with you that there are many of the things that were typically thought of as esoteric, alchemy and so forth, have been demystified through science by introducing new technologies with how we study them and gauge them. But something to consider is, it seems like oftentimes when we develop, let's say a new telescope, all of a sudden we have new information and we say everything we thought is now wrong, and we have to take out this whole part of this textbook, or at least a good portion of it was discredited or challenged. And so sometimes what we believe to be true, or we consider to maybe be true, is really only as thorough or reliable as the tools in which we have to examine them. And as transhumanists, I would hope that that can always be remembered, is that as the tools and the technologies are evolving, that we can always remain open to rediscover things that we formerly thought were fact. And I think all science should do that. Another good example of that, I think, is so beautiful, which again, these were former alchemists and natural philosophers from 14th century and beyond: Galileo, Leonardo da Vinci, Isaac Newton. I mean, these people were connected to the universe in almost eerie ways. I mean, it seems like they just downloaded data from the universe to understand and invent the things that they did. This is predating some of the technology, and even predating calculus and predating the things we had to observe these things. And then even their stories of how they gained knowledge and access to this knowledge would sometimes sound like what we would call pseudoscience, because they would say, it dawned on me, I just considered this, I just considered that. I was out in nature and I experienced it, I felt it. And Albert Einstein says, the intuitive mind is the master, and the rational mind is but a faithful servant. But it seems as though in society we have forgotten the master, but honor the servant. And this was Einstein. And now, granted, intuition, I'm sure, again, one would have a propensity to break this down to and explain it through the neural architecture, memories, and so forth. But I do think that it becomes more nuanced. And again, matter. I love things like somatics, which talks about how vibration is responsible for matter taking shape, and looking deeper into these concepts of what really is the source, right? Every time we're using science to find a culprit, to find the end result and definition of this or that, we're looking for the source, and the source for that source, which ultimately is God, the source. And then that goes on a whole other existential journey. One more example, sorry, I'm on a tirade, but I love the example of Giordano Bruno, was a cosmologist in Italy, I think 14th century again, and he was being heavily
16th
ridiculed.
century. He was,
Oh,
yeah,
I love
Giordano
how
Bruno.
Giannotti's
Didn't he
always
get burned?
Yes, he did get burned at the stake because
Wait,
He,
no, let me tell the story because
yeah.
that's part of the sort of bridge.
Mhm.
So yeah, so he was being heavily ridiculed for a lot of his theories, obviously going against the Catholic Church and what they believed to be true about the Earth being not only the center of the solar system. This predated the solar system, so they believed it was the center of the universe, that perhaps was all that existed. So of course, it was very scandalous for Bruno to come out with these other concepts and these other ideas. But then, so he was imprisoned first of all for spreading these, scandalous, blasphemy, and in prison with no access to any books, to any machines, to any technology. He didn't even have a way to write down notations of his ideas, but he did have a small cellular window tilting up toward the night sky. And he claimed that it was in prison, this was published, that he was able to suddenly understand that the sun was the center of what was possibly a solar system. And I forget the word for this invention, this idea, the elliptical, or not
Heliocentrism?
I'm sorry?
Heliocentric.
Yes, it's
Yes,
heliocentrism.
he invented heliocentric theory, yes. So, and then getting out of prison, instead of saying, "Oh, I'll keep my mouth shut and stay out of prison," of course, what every great scientist would do is say, "No way, I have an idea." And so not only did he have this idea, but I think this is a great example. And yes, he was eventually burned alive for exposing this idea, because he was so passionate that, this might be the truth, and that the truth being ultimately what was most important here. What I love about it, like I said, was it was something that dawned on him, or almost as if it were data that he downloaded or got intuitively, or a subconscious, uh, understanding or connection. So that was a good example of that, because he was in prison at the time. But so when you ask what I believe about what fundamentally exists, I mean, I'm definitely open to the testimonies of people with near-death experiences, psychedelic journeys, other visions that they've had. I've definitely experienced some of these things, and I've done my best to demystify them myself as a skeptic and scientist. And trust me, I always go over those rational conclusions before determining anything also. But yes, I'm very connected to supernatural or ultrasensory, or what did they call it? Not ultrasensory, but the extrasensory perceptions and so forth.
Yes, thank you. And the story of Giordano Bruno is quite interesting. So this is what Wikipedia states about him. He proposed that the stars were distant suns surrounded by their own planets, exoplanets, in the 16th century. And he raised the possibility that these planets might foster life of their own, a cosmological position known as cosmic pluralism. He also insisted that the universe is infinite and could have no center. So that ran counter to
Mm.
the Roman Catholic Church orthodoxy of the time, which was geocentric, and they had this elaborate model of epicycles to explain the observations about celestial bodies while still maintaining the position that the Earth was at the center and immovable. And Bruno challenged that on many fronts, and
And
unfortunately,
mind you, he was Christian.
mhm.
He was
Yes,
self-proclaimed to be Christian, even at the time of being burned, but he still believed in truth and truth seeking.
Mhm. Yes, yes, indeed. And our friend Zach Varkaris has joined us. He writes in our internal chat, we call it magic when we can't explain it. When we can, we call it science. And this reminds me of Arthur C. Clarke's third law: any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So I do think it's possible, for instance, in the future to have phenomena like direct communication from one mind to another. This would be done through brain computer interfaces, for instance. There have been experiments with what is essentially telekinesis, where one person might essentially move their hand on one continent, and the person on another continent might actually feel a sensation arising from that. So it is possible. I do think there are essentially physical intermediary steps that would make that happen. Now, it's interesting, one of our commentators in the chat actually noted, based on your comments, that you believe in a God, but you told me before you were not always of that conviction, that you used to be an atheist. So Mike Lazine wonders if you do believe in a God, and if so, what sort of God is it? Is it a small g God? Do you know or purport to know the nature of said God?
So it's hard for me to say I believe in God, but I like, as the modern day philosopher Jordan Peterson puts it, that he as well is very skeptical, and maybe doesn't believe in a God, but chooses to live as though he does, or as though there is a God. And I think when I returned back to, obviously I was sort of militant atheism when I was younger, but when I returned to a place of being more comfortable to just have faith in certain things that I may not be able to understand or prove or examine in my lifetime, I was definitely happier immediately. And of course, we can explain that with neuroscience and so forth, and why that would be more comfortable. But I also think that is sort of intrinsic, because when I think about things like prayer and meditation and mantra and things that people have all around the world expressed, that when they've done these things, they didn't just feel peace, but they felt a specific feeling that was like a unification. It was a specific feeling of being separated from the physical identity, from the ego of, I am Amy, these are the experiences that I have had, these are my biases, this is my age, this is my this is my that, a sort of separation from that. It's a little bit uncomprehendable, especially if you haven't experienced it. But it feels like a unification, a oneness. It feels like you're with God, would be the only way to put it, that people have put it. And although in some ways, again, I think there are physical ways to kind of explain it. I also think even if you could explain it physically and say, okay, it was this hormonal reaction here and this neural network there and so forth, where you felt you had a memory of this and a predisposition to conclude that because of this experience and so forth. Even if that's true, I still say, why though to that? Why with mantra and meditation and prayer, or especially transcendental meditation or so forth, or near-death experiences, ayahuasca, whatever you want to call it? Why would those experiences from people all around the world, without having influenced one another, they hadn't yet even contacted one another in, like, let's say, ancient civilizations, had the same experiences of this particular unification that was a void and an emptiness and a sort of nothingness of what we know now as this identity, but at the same time was still an ethereal experience of unification, being joined with something else outside of ourselves, that's sort of uncomprehendable within our human senses. Why does that happen? Even if there's a physical, biological, physiological explanation for that, why is there an explanation for that? Where does that come from? Where is that place that they're feeling that? Where does it come from and why? And so even still, I think there's still an open-ended question there. And I think even with technology, like you said, to foster the ability to have more telekinetic communications and so forth, I would still ask, well, why do we want that? Why do we do that? It's fantastical that we're even here to begin with. It's always going to be, no matter what we do with technology, there's always going to be a question mark. And do I believe in God? Um, I don't believe that we are God. I do believe that it is our duty as humans to continue accelerating evolutionarily as much as possible, to be more and more capable and more in the image of God, so to speak. But I do think there are other dimensions, most likely other dimensions and other planes. And in my opinion, I don't think Earth is a highest realm or a higher realm, and I think it's possible to advance beyond this realm. So um, I don't think, even with human evolution, I don't think that we will achieve the highest godly realms that possibly exist in the universe.
Yes, that's quite an interesting answer. And actually, I have a bit of a parallel story. So, back when I was applying to Hillsdale College, which is a conservative educational institution in Michigan, it has a very strong Christian culture, though at the time it was non-denominational officially. And I
Mhm.
was being interviewed for a merit scholarship. And I was in this room with essentially a committee of professors. And mostly we talked about economics and history. And I provided quite a strongly Enlightenment oriented set of responses to their questions. And one of the professors, the professor of theology, asked, well, what room does this leave in your worldview for God? And I didn't want to say outright, I'm an atheist and materialist and I don't believe in God, because even though I understood my audience and I wanted to give a kind of softer answer that might be better received. And I said essentially, well, according to most Abrahamic theologies, God made man in his own image. So should we not strive to become more like God through improving ourselves and through advancing science and technology and essentially creating better lives for ourselves? And what I didn't realize at the time was they might have thought, is he a Mormon? Because that is actually very much aligned with Mormon theology, as we discussed previously in our salon with Carl Youngblood. And what ended up
Ooh.
happening, by the way, is that they did not give me a full merit scholarship. They gave me a 3/4 tuition scholarship. They probably reserved their full merit scholarships to more conventional Christians, but that's okay because I still had a much less expensive college education than most. And it was definitely a very interesting time. So I appreciate that response. And I also wanted to bring in a question from Super Fin Guy, who wonders if you could define intuition, because you mentioned that in your previous
Mhm.
explanation. What do you think intuition is?
Right. So uh, when I think about, for example, that human beings are eukaryotes, just like plants are eukaryotes, mammals are eukaryotes, I think about the fungal network and the mycorrhizal network, which is the root systems of plants, and how they're able to communicate over vast distances. But not only communicate that there's harm, but they can actually administer medicine to one another, sort of, so to speak. They can send protective. Through electrocurrents, through using the volatile organic compounds and so forth that they send, like a biological organic compounds to one another to help them have resistance to prey and predators and different things like that. It reminds me so much of the neural architecture in the human brain. And again, with the concepts like quantum entanglement and so forth, that kind of reminds me of intuition and the complexities possibly of the universe. And um, let me segue. Let me make this other example really quick. I like when Neil deGrasse Tyson says, when people ask him, "Do you think aliens exist?" and he picks up a cup. He says that's like picking up a cup of water from the ocean and saying, "Well, there's no whales in here, so there must not be any whales in the ocean." And that's applies the same concept about the universe. If you were to say, "Oh, well, I haven't seen any aliens here, so there must not be any in the universe," and I think the same thing can be said about intuition and consciousness, something that we aren't necessarily able to use like meta analysis on or conduct the scientific method on it to always have consistent results, then people want to just say, oh, well, then therefore it maybe isn't worth considering. But I think again, yeah, it kind of is mirrored in nature here and there, where we can kind of see this activity, this ability to sort of communicate and respond beyond just instinct in a way where we can telepathically communicate or receive beyond just hormonal communications, because there are those invisible forces that we used to think of as magic. But I actually think it's bigger than that. I think it is sort of um, there's a unified field of sorts that you are able to sometimes tap into or receive. And I've actually experimented on it myself, and to have some I've produced some amazing, amazing results. This was before I was interested in speaking publicly and engaging in a scientific community. Otherwise, I would have tried to record it. So it's really just my word, but I've done some, and it's the other people were there to see it. So I do have, testimonies of witnesses, but I was able to actually practice intuition experiments.
Very interesting. So, my take on intuition is that it's essentially an integration of life experience that is accumulated over a long time, and one doesn't analytically go through the same process that might have formed an initial insight or an initial response to a new experience, but there is a certain level of learning that one might do without being aware of it, so that one can encounter future situations and have a certain feeling that really is a recapitulation of what one has lived through earlier and what experiences were correlated with what results. So, for instance, the older I get, the better my intuitions become regarding weather. I look at weather forecasts, but they're flawed. And sometimes I get a sense just looking out at the sky, at the clouds, and considering essentially the situations I've been in. I don't go through this explicitly, but sometimes I get a bad feeling that the weather will turn bad. And this is important for me because in the parts where I drive, if the weather is bad, one could get stranded, one could get into an accident. Or if I go on a lengthy trail run, for instance, I do not want to get stranded in bad weather. And I remember in 2011, I was doing a trail race where the sky was clear at the start of the race. I had the option to do a half marathon or a 50K. And I had actually wanted to do a half marathon, but all of the slots for that were full. So I ended up signing up for the 50K. I had the option at the start to drop down to a half marathon, but everyone kept telling me, well, yes, there's bad weather predicted, but right now the sky is clear and you'll be back in time before the storm sets in. So I decided to go with the 50K. And 5 hours in, during the most difficult portion, when I was 20 miles in, climbing a steep slope up a mountain, I got hailed on. I had lightning in the immediate vicinity, and then a torrential downpour of rain began. And essentially the entire goal of the race shifted for me to one of survival. And I thought to myself, I had this intuition, I had this foreboding feeling that I would not make it out in time if I did the 50K. And I pushed through, I made it after 8 hours to the finish line. But it led me to recognize at the time that I'm actually old enough that I've had enough life experience that these kinds of integrations that my mind performs, often subconsciously, could actually be useful guides, and I should listen to them a bit more instead of just looking at the immediate empirical evidence and making logical deductions from it. But it's not really something that I was prone to doing initially. When I was in my teens and early 20s, I would just solely consider what my rational mind told me, the explicit evidence before me and the deductions that I could draw from that evidence. And now I think the intuition is a bit more of a useful guide. I still think it's emergent from essentially life experience and physical phenomena. But that is definitely an interesting topic. And I have other questions for you. I want to open
May
it
I
up.
respond to that
Yes,
subtly?
certainly.
I won't go too
Certainly.
far into it, but thank you for sharing that. And I see where you can consider that as, your experiences to have those predictions, but to also sort of have an intuitive feeling. But you again sort of attributed that to the experiences with the predictions, and that maybe it was subconsciously, it was really a neurological response to your memories that you weren't maybe necessarily obviously noticing. So it felt like intuition is kind of what you're saying, right? So And I hear you on that. I just think that there are a lot of other examples that I think would be harder to reduce it just to a memory of a prediction or a muscle memory of those experiences. And this is not to argue, but just for the sake of science. And something I like to think about is that I don't think we understand time as well as we think we do. Maybe it's nonlinear. Maybe it's possible to remember the future. And I know that sounds bizarre, but it's kind of an inkling that I've had before from different experiences that I've had. So anyways, I'll let you proceed to the next thing for now.
Yes, this is an interesting conversation, and we could pick it up a little bit later. Art Ramon writes that subconscious processing seems like the root of intuition. And yes, I would agree with that. So, Art Ramon, I'll give you the next question or comment.
Didn't have anything prepared, but yeah, that's been my experience. I think that when I have a hunch or an intuition, it's basically what I have stored in memory. And it's not my consciousness, my awareness, it's the background. I remember at one time I used to, when I was, say, drafting a something to write, an essay or something, I would have these voices in the background just whispering away, mentally drafting something I was going to write. And I think that's basically intuition. That's the background process that at one time I could almost hear, like whispering in the background. And that's been my experience with intuition.
Yes, very interesting. So a kind of a subtle inner voice. I have a very strong inner voice. I know some people have said that they don't, which is a bit baffling to me, but I always have this internal dialogue with myself, and I quite consciously experience it. But yes, there are certain sensations that are kind of in the background, certain hunches that are even difficult to verbalize, but over time, I'm starting to recognize that they tend to be fairly accurate, at least if I'm not in a completely weird situation that I've never been in before. Daniel Tweed writes, if there were no subconscious mentation and everything was in our conscious minds, that might be quite crazy making. There would be a lot of information. This is actually why we sleep as well, because we experience so much during the day that the
Oh, yes.
mind has to kind of defragment like a computer.
Oh,
And
yes. Actually, oh, sorry, go
go,
ahead.
no, go
Yeah,
ahead.
may I? Yes, I wanted to say I actually do think that this is a sort of protection that we have, that we've evolved to not be totally telepathic and be capable of telekinesis. It's sort of protecting us, and that's something that people fear with transhumanism or the singularity, getting to a point where either we ourselves or other forms of AI are able to do those things, and the power getting in the wrong hands and how dangerous that could actually be. And I think it actually protect us. Yet we would actually go crazy if we could read other people's minds all the time. I mean, that'd be horrible. But yeah, it remains mysterious until science can reveal why there are some moments where it's indistinguishably an almost psychic moment. I mean, there are plenty of experiences that are much more direct in that sense. There are a lot of testimonies, a lot of things I've seen, heard, experienced, and from other people, and I think I'm glad it's not consistent enough to examine, because that would be weird. So yeah, but I just wanted to segue that with transhumanism, I think that's something to also consider. If we get to a point where we're able to experiment with human consciousness and altered states of consciousness through technology, I mean, we would want to be careful. But you know that.
Yes, I think we always
So,
need to have a
hey,
choice as individuals to
uh,
share or not to share uh, what we are thinking, what we are experiencing. So there would
let
need
me
to
weigh
be,
in
yeah, there
on
would
one
need to
thing
be
real
some sort of,
quick.
let me finish this. There would need to be
Uh,
some sort of protective feature, just like if you go on a website and you accept the terms of service, though these would be more granular terms of service, or select what cookies you want to accept on your computer and reject the marketing cookies. I think by default, of course, you should not be sharing the contents of your mind with other people, and it should be an opt-in. So do you opt into this connection? And if so, what do you specifically opt into? That's my thought. But Jason, go ahead.
Mhm. Yeah, it brings up a really big philosophical question of what makes us a good person. You know, if we could all read each other's minds, then as soon as I have a bad thought, everybody knows it. And so everybody knows what the good thing is. Okay. And so the only way to kind of know if somebody is good is if they are cut off and can't read everybody's minds. And it makes me wonder, maybe that's why we can't. Because how would they know, and how would we know if we're a good person if we can just read what is good, what is not? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, if I may, yeah, again, I think this is something that protects us, and that if there are aliens out there who are capable of this, I would imagine that they've also evolved past certain emotions or survival needs. But something why I think it's pertinent and relevant, again, is going back to examples I was making with Leonardo Bruno or Isaac Newton, where they used a sort of seemingly telepathic connection with the universe to understand something, to comprehend something before they had the technology to observe it and to study it and use the scientific method. And I just want scientists and transhumanists alike to be always open to that open-ended question and considering something that seems impossible or seems like it was a pseudoscience, and to always be open to asking that question, to receiving the answer you didn't expect. And that would include having that intuitive nature open, that intuitive neural network, kind of like I said, like the fungal networks and the mycorrhizal plant root systems, where they are by over vast distances still communicating. And so I think somehow we are tethered to certain parts of reality in the universe that we can sometimes mystically tap into. And I just want science to be more open to those things without calling it, hippy dippy crap. But
Interesting. Now, I have often thought that when one is thinking or reflecting about possibilities, one's mind is a testing ground. So mere thoughts, especially if they're not articulated or shared with others, are not a reflection of a person's character, because moral virtue stems from action rather than thought. So the physical choice that one makes, what one chooses to instantiate in the physical world, that is a reflection of one's character, whether or not one is a good person. When one is thinking, one can consider multiple alternatives. One doesn't always come up with the correct decision right away. One could weigh different options, but then one is responsible for what one ultimately decides. And this is why I also think people should have always the option to keep their thoughts to themselves, because they could be tentative. They may not end up being realized in the external world, and it's only the realization in the external world that reflects on one's character. Now, Zach, you have a comment on intuition.
Yeah. Hi, Amy. Good to see you.
hi.
And thanks for that, Amy. Yeah, so it's interesting because there's a few points. One is you talk about Giordano Bruno and how he came up with it intuitively, or like how the magic got. Aristophanes was a Greek mathematician.
Just really quick, I'm having trouble hearing him. It seems like you guys
Yes.
can hear him. Are you going to be able to maybe repeat that to me, Gennady?
Yeah, so Zach, I do think we have an audio issue, so let's hear you with the microphone now.
Okay.
Is that better?
A little bit for me.
Yeah.
What about you guys?
Just a little bit. Maybe put the microphone closer to you.
Hello.
Yes.
Okay, that's better. That should be enough.
Yeah, so Aristophanes was a mathematician, and he came up with the circumference of the Earth, and he came up with it by looking at shadows in a well in Alexandria about 190 BC, and he was 50 miles short of the actual true circumference of the Earth that we measured today. This guy came up with it looking at the shadow in the sun. anyone been into the deep ocean and no sunlight there, you can see the sun, the sky at night in a way that you can't see in modern life because we block everything out with light. And the reason I say that is because what is viewed as something that is intuitive is actually just observational. So then I think the next thing then is to look at, well, intuition is such that you have these signals that you are born with naturally. And like, when you're a kid, you do things, and then in hindsight, you knew you shouldn't have done that. But why is it that when you're older, you learn to listen to those signals inside of you? And I think that is something that we tend to forget, and we tend to ignore with our pearl, because we're told that unless you can prove it, unless you can see it, unless you can touch it, it's not real. That's a very shallow, two-dimensional view, because not everything is in the visible band of light, and that's just the reality. Most things are not in the visible band of light, and even if you take out the whole spectrum, then even that visible band is a tiny amount within a much larger amount. So I think the sense that intuition is something you're innately born with, it's just learning how to read those signals. Give you an example, you were talking about your 50 kilometer run. I remember doing a training tournament, and I had this bad feeling before something happened. And it was because the signals were there telling me this was the wrong setup. And actually, something bad happened. I had an accident, and it could have been a lot worse, but it was pretty bad. I think with experience, you learn how to overcome adversity, but at the same time, you ignore actually what's being told to you. There's this really fine line between, the triumph of hope over experience, and vice versa.
Yes, thank you.
Gennady, it was very hard for me to get a lot of that, primarily the first 35 seconds, maybe. Were you hearing it clearly?
I had to focus a bit. I do think I heard some of it. So he was saying that with experience, one is able to better overcome adversity and essentially learn the signals that bad situations can send.
Okay, I'm seeing Zach shake his head no. And Zach, to be clear, I did hear you expressing an experience you had with intuition, the foreboding feeling, and then something happening, and about the why it would be relevant to learn how to read these signals and how. But I did miss some of that. And I also want to say, did you say in the beginning about Giordano Bruno that he was using shadows, examining shadows to come up with his hypothesis?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
That's a little better. It's probably clearer, but
I'll type it out. It'll be easier.
Okay. Yeah, my story, from what I remember about Bruno, was definitely something I read and listened to from Neil deGrasse Tyson. So it's not something I studied a lot. I'm sure he did use shadows and tangible forms of examining his theories, but I do distinctly remember there was also in prison when he didn't have he may have been observing shadows at that time, but I thought I remembered it being published that he himself even expressed it as a sort of ethereal, mystical knowing that he just gained access to, sort of. But maybe there's more to it.
I'll type up the question. It'll be easier.
Okay.
Thank you. And I'm suddenly hearing you slightly better now. But I would like to hear more of what you're saying about intuition.
All right. So we'll await Zach's insights. He will type them up and I will read them out. But now let's go to Ben Ballweg.
Thanks for being here, Amy. I would ask about how you got as involved in politics as you did to become the secretary of the Libertarian Party, how that whole progress happened.
Thanks. That was probably very much influenced by my upbringing and my parents. Both of my parents are very probably constitutionalist and very patriotic. They have so much love for their country, mostly from their parents being first or second generation here and the escaping a situation. And so that was instilled in them to have such a love of country and what it was meant to stand for life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. And so I was definitely indoctrinated with, how how honorable that is and how that should be protected. So that was definitely a big part of my culture. And then, yeah, for me, it was definitely Ron Paul, this iconic figure that was saying the things we were thinking. You know, he did a filibuster on the Federal Reserve, and I had never seen anything like that. I knew that politics were broken, but I didn't even know that it was possible for someone like Ron Paul to gain as much traction as he did. So that was so inspiring. So yeah, I definitely grew up in a household that was very much pro freedom and the pursuit of protecting freedom, and how ultimately the pursuit of liberty really fosters the most important parts of our existence for curiosity, for creativity, for ingenuity and evolving, and eventually more altruism and more peace, because we will be able to solve world problems. But we need that. We need a liberty in order to do so. And I relate with my own restless nature. I helps me relate with anyone in captivity, anyone suffering with the inability to experience liberty for their own human rights, or even animals in cages and things like that. That from a very young age, I just it felt so wrong to me. So very much just a part of who I am.
Yes, thank you for that explanation. And indeed, as I've said, we've had similar political journeys. I have this, let's say, impression that I didn't so much leave the Libertarian Party as the Libertarian Party left me over the past, I would say, 7 to 8 years especially. I did end up voting for Gary Johnson and Joe Jorgensen as well. Unfortunately, we couldn't get Charlie Cam on the ballot in Nevada for the Transhumanist Party, and there are no write-in options. Otherwise, I would have written in Charlie Cam in Nevada in 2020. But I do think that in the Libertarian Party, there has been an increasing embrace of technophobia, of unjustified conspiracy theories, of just a rejection of anything having to do with science and technology, and even a hostility toward transhumanism, not from all libertarians, but for instance, Michael Rechtenwald, one of the leading contenders for the libertarian nomination right now, is an explicit anti-transhumanist, and he has written about the danger of transhumanism. And unlike someone like Alex Jones, Rechtenwald, who is an academic, actually understands transhumanism pretty well. He just philosophically opposes it, and he seems to have at least a decent shot at the Libertarian nomination. Hopefully he won't win. But it's that kind of shift that has led me to think that the Libertarian Party, not libertarianism as a philosophy, but a lot of the constituencies now comprising it, has shifted into essentially a kind of anti-scientific reactionary direction. Is that your impression as well, that libertarians used to be more sensible, more rational back when you and I were more extensively involved, and then the party kind of fragmented into the kind of reactionary types that I'm talking about, and then on the other hand, what I would call Democrats light? Essentially, they're like the Democrats in terms of their views, just maybe a little bit less extreme. But I'd be interested in your views on that.
Yeah, you mentioned Gary Johnson. I think it was the second time he ran. It was right around that time libertarians started getting a little wonky. There was the guy drinking the goat's blood and stuff. I don't remember, but there were some very eccentric characters that were coming out identifying as libertarian because, again, people want the freedom to be eccentric. So you're going to find a lot of mixed groups there. I know there's a Libertarian Transhumanist Party. And did you see that on the Wikipedia?
Well,
Years
I think
ago,
I
the
think it was a
transhumanism Wikipedia.
Libertarian Transhumanist Caucus, and Adam Kokesh actually talked to me about the idea of forming that in 2020, but I don't think it went anywhere, but you may
Yeah,
have
it
different
only
information.
mentioned like maybe only 6 or 7 different transhumanist groups, and one of them on the Wikipedia was Libertarian Transhumanists or Libertarians for Transhumanism. But I would say that's probably maybe a little less common. The average libertarian that I meet would definitely not want there to be federal regulations or anything prohibiting your personal sovereignty over your body to biomodulate or bio experiment with your own body for whatever purposes. There is a greater fear, I think, among libertarian constitutionalists about the propensity for elitism with technology and gene, eugenics and so forth, of being able to create a more powerful human, but you need the money and so forth to do this. And then also, so yeah, so I think there's the fear of the propensity for elitism among eugenics and transhumanism that some libertarians feel very cautious of. I also think that millennials in general are more likely to be libertarian, it seems like, and I think that correlates with that. Right now, millennials seem to be very inspired by returning to old world traditionalism and fostering, having your own food and your own agriculture, having, going back to the simplicity of life that way, that is not, whether it's all the way off the grid or just having your own garden and having your own farm. Millennials are really bringing that back to life right now, and which is kind of in a different direction than transhumanism to some degree. They definitely do not like the idea of bioengineered meat and other things that are just seemingly like, oh, this is propaganda to make you less healthy. Some conspiracies like that. I don't like the idea of bioengineered meat either. I don't know that it's very healthy, but I like the idea of not having to kill to survive one day. I mean, why not get to a place where we don't have to, life doesn't feed off life, at least in the human existence, so much. But so unfortunately, we're just at a crossroads right now where, with transhumanist goals, there's a lot of error, and there is a propensity for elitism, and also there is just we don't quite have the solutions yet, like bioengineered meat and things that people are just going, oh gosh, I don't want that. So so yes, I have experienced some of what you're saying, but I think more often than not, they're not necessarily trying to legally get in anyone's way.
Mhm. Yeah, and I don't think it's so much legal as it is rhetorical. So I would love to have bioengineered meat. I am not a vegetarian, but if I could purchase a 3D printed burger in place of a burger derived through conventional means, I would do that if I even had to pay twice as much, for instance. And the reason I would do that is not solely because of ethical considerations. I would like to think that something I eat did not result in the death of an animal, but that is, I would say, of secondary importance to me personally, and there are different views among transhumanists about this. I would say bioengineered meat would be biologically identical to the meat that we or many of us would consume today, but it would be cleaner, because who knows not only what these animals were exposed to either in a free range setting or in captivity, but also right now the techniques of factory farming introduce health hazards that I think could be readily avoided with bioengineered meat. So I am of a very different view from the kinds of libertarians you described. I also find it rather unfortunate that many of them seem to have this elitist association with transhumanism, as if we have anything to do with, say, Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. There is no tie there. I mean, Klaus Schwab has his own ideas. One can debate whether they're good or bad, but
Right.
there are a lot of libertarians who unfortunately kind of lump everything together and call it transhumanism, even though it's not. And no actual transhumanist would espouse those same ideas. Now,
Mm.
I'd like to weigh in real quick on, I think a simpler explanation of why the libertarian split is just because a simple truth of politics, and that reactionary politics works. It's effective when you use emotion and when you are willing to be the shock jock just for the sense of, shocking. That's, and we went over this with Ben Zion, and we don't want to go that route. And that's like the right wing route, where if there's pressure to, because if you fall out of line, they will like come for you and pressure you, and it's a whole political tactic. And they probably did it because it's effective, and in that they are right. That the form of politics is effective. Whether or not that's ethical, I don't think so, and I would rather go Gennadi's route. And so I'll hand it back to you there, Gennady.
Yes, I hope we can inaugurate a different approach to politics that is more effective than the shock jock tactics. And what Jason was referring to was a certain individual who tried to introduce that within transhumanist discourse, and we reacted rather strongly against that, fortunately. But Amy, please go ahead.
In response to the question you asked me, yeah, actually, when I shared that I was going to be on this podcast on my story, a libertarian friend of mine responded, and if you're watching, hi. And he said, "The transhumanists, you mean the depopulators? I can't believe it. You got to be kidding me." And I was like, no, if anything, they are definitely not on board with the theory that we're overpopulated. If anything, most transhumanists are accused of contributing to overpopulation one day. That's the concerns like brilliant Elon Musk and other people have with transhumanists. So it was funny to see that his idea right away was, oh, the depopulists. And I had never considered transhumanists to be depopulist. I would think it'd be the inverse would be the concern. But so, yeah, I would imagine that libertarians just have a different understanding of what the end goal is and what and so forth. Go ahead.
Yes, so let me tell your friend something very explicitly. The vast majority of transhumanists believe that overpopulation is a myth. It doesn't exist as a problem. We want to extend existing human lifespans, and we are not concerned about people having too many children. In fact, many transhumanists think the opposite is a problem, that we may be facing a demographic collapse unless we radically extend human lifespans.
Mhm.
The whole concern about overpopulation is a concern from the neo-Malthusian left. And these have been historically some of the strongest ideological adversaries of transhumanism. And I would say anybody who lumps the two together is listening to some serious propaganda, like Alex Jones type propaganda. And they really need to get their facts straight. So hopefully your friend will hear this particular message. But Zach has provided his thoughts in writing, so I want to read them out and maybe try again with his microphone. So he says, Eratosthenes was a Greek mathematician in approximately 190 BC who calculated the circumference of the Earth to within 50 nanometers 50 kilometers accuracy, I think he said, by looking at shadows cast down a well from the sun. That was an intuitive leap which turned out to be accurate. So, Zach, please try again. Let's see if your microphone works better.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Better.
Right. All right. Yeah, I had it on the wrong thing. I was running a bit late. Sorry. It was actually nautical miles, not nanometers. Nautical miles, which is a bit more than the mile. So I just,
Yes.
being a marine biologist, you know how it is. But fundamentally, what I'm saying is there's so many acts of intuitive leaps that are counted now regarded as scientific fact. I mean, even in the area that I work in, which is, molecular biology and stem cell stuff like that, a lot of the things that have been done that are working, that we work in, everyone after the event says, yeah, I planned it all along and I had it all structured. That's BS. And really what they actually did was they took a leap of faith and they discovered that from that leap of faith, it became a statement of fact. And I think that's what I mean by intuition. And very often things, for instance, as I was saying, with intuition, you have the signals and they're given to you at a very early age, but you just don't know how to interpret them and read them. And when you're a girl and you do it, you're a hysterical woman. Oh, it's hysterical! Oh my God! If you're a guy, you're not being manly enough because you're in touch with your emotions, so you can't win. But fundamentally, those emotions are inside us all. I'm sure many of us have had this, and I'm not going to go into too many details, but moments where you wake up in the middle of the night after dreaming of someone that you maybe haven't seen for a long time, or someone you've maybe not even met, but it's been a friend of a friend. And you wake up and you look at the clock or something like that, and then you discover that day or the day afterwards that person died. And you've gone through this whole person's life. Why would you have that connection? What is that reason? It's something that we cannot explain, but it exists. So it is in the realm of magic before it becomes the realm of science. Magic's a lot more fun. And so, you have that essence where, okay, well, what do we do with that? And how do we make that work? And so I think intuition is very important. And most of how I personally work would be much more intuitive than sensory, because senses can be deceived. We can make visual illusions. That's why we shave beards, or that's why we wear makeup or wear clothing to make us look slimmer or bigger or fatter or shorter, or whatever it is. Those are illusions. Those are sensory illusions. You have to look beneath that, and that's intuition, in my opinion. And I think that's something that's important. One other couple of things I just wanted to say, because there's a couple more questions, which is, you talked about your friend with the population and the sort of WEF stuff. We do have a demographic collapse. I work in the fertility area of science. We absolutely, Japan is losing 800,000 people per year to death. Now, the question is, do we get out and go forth and multiply like the good old days, or do we accept that we have to do a compromise between living longer? Because back in the old days, when you were 50, I mean, I see you say you're 52, right? Well, mate, you're only 10 years away from death in 1960, right? So, but you're intending to live another 40 years. 50 years, probably 100, almost 60 years. So if you have those 60 years, okay, well, let's just take it with 50 to begin with. Be happy with 50 and work out the other 100 after that, okay? So if we look at that, you have to have the ability to maximize those pieces of your life. So your person who's talking about transhumanism, well, you know what? I bet your friend, he wears glasses or he has clothes. Well, he's transhumanist then. Does he cut his hair? How dare he cuts his hair? That's transhumanism, because he should be in a beard, running around and just grunting in the jungle. Otherwise, he's a transhumanist. We're all transhumanists, because we're all trying to improve ourselves in some way or other. And I think also the other thing as well is that anyway, that's my piece. That's it. I'm not going to say anymore. But
Thank you. I love that.
That was cool.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank you,
cool.
Zach. I
always. Oh, sorry. Go first. You started first.
I will just provide a few resources on this. So Max Moore has an excellent essay from 2005 called Super Longevity Without Overpopulation, which I would encourage everyone to read. Our Transhumanist Party Vice Chairman, Arin Vahanian, has an article from 2021, a bit more recent, called The Overpopulation Myth. And then Steve Hill and Elena Milova from lifespan.io wrote an essay in 2019 called Will Increased Lifespans Cause Overpopulation, where they essentially went point by point through the arguments of those who are concerned about overpopulation in what I would consider to be a rigorous and objective way. So these are good resources, both for people who are concerned about overpopulation and for people who misattribute that concern to transhumanists. But Amy, please go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for sharing those articles. Yeah, I wasn't going to say anything too mind-blowing, but in response to Zach, yeah, I always hear when people are talking about the future of science and how excited they are for it. I hear a lot of times people say that's why science fiction becomes science fact, and isn't that cool? How what was once on Star Trek is now real. And I think that reminds me of the Picasso quote where he says, "If you can imagine it, it exists somewhere." And that excites me about intuition and how does science fiction become science fact? Is it because we first imagined it? Is it because we first even considered it and played it out and rehearsed it and in a magical way? Yeah, and I love what you had to say about actually the senses can be quite deceptive, and whereas the sort of sixth sense is maybe even more reliable at times, and a lot of the biggest scientific breakthroughs happened to a person who was more receptive to that sixth sense experience.
Yeah. In answer to that, I mean, just even from just a really sort of pedestrian viewpoint of playing sport, for instance, if anyone's ever done sort of competitive sport, like combat sports. So if you're in the ring with someone, 1 inch difference in height can make all the difference in a fight. It's just like it's all a matter of fractions. So you look at and they'll say, you don't look as big as you actually are, or you look bigger than you actually are in real life. So you're giving them the illusion. And if you look at the greatest fighters of any boxing or any of the Bruce Lee or all these sort of people, they or Muhammad Ali, whoever they are, they all have the ability to have an illusionary aspect to them, to deceive those around them in a sensory way. Is that intuitive? Is that a con man? Is that good or bad, as the person said? And the last point on this is about the shock jock. The body works. You have to understand that we're an organism that works a certain way, and the way that we work much better with shock because that's what keeps us alive. The fear of death keeps us alive. That's translated into shock, and so that's why it works because people are more attuned to fear than to good things. It's just the way we are, and we have to
Yeah,
acknowledge
I
that.
heard a neuroscientist, just to bounce off that. I forget what they call it, but it's the failure that the neuroscientists have a nickname for it, the failure response, where the brain is able to create
Fight or
memories
flight.
and have,
Fight or flight.
well, fight or flight, but similarly, they were saying the brain creates a faster synaptic response to failure and to fear, and that cortisol spike because of, yes, our ancestors were needed that in order to survive. So we actually are much slower at creating memories and creating new neural networks and neuroplasticity for more positive change in outcome. And why that's so important to practice those things and journal it or say I am affirmations, because we already have a higher propensity to create faster memories and faster neural networks about fear-based apprehensions.
Yes, and one of the main reasons for that is because fewer moving parts are required to actually create a fear-based memory. In fact, it takes more muscles to smile than it does to frown. So in that sense, and maybe there's a reason for it, because when you're too busy fighting off a predator, you don't need to waste time smiling, or you don't need to waste time doing good stuff. You just have to do the minimum. You're going into like sort of backup mode on the computer. You just keep it really simple. And so you're right, but of course we're now evolved. Yes, we have the infrastructure of a caveman, but we don't live in, well, most of us don't live in caveman world anymore. So you're right. We have to adapt. Society has to go back to being the way it was, or biology has to catch up with society, and we're choosing the latter. So let's make that work.
If I may bounce off that one more time, is that this is another great reminder for neuroplasticity and how doing these exercises for longevity and health spans regarding mental health and so forth, and reducing mental fatigue with these harmonizing practices, be it meditation, but also I am affirmations, and creating that habit of being in a more positive mind frame. They actually did use meta-analysis and systematic experiments to prove how this works, how mind over matter, that the mind thoughts and intention can manipulate matter and form matter. And so this was definitely pseudoscience not even that long ago, but there are now neuroscientists embracing this as science. One of the more recent studies, since you mentioned sports, I'm eager to use this example, although there are many, was they got participants to get together and they used technology to examine the body while to monitor their bodies by connecting something to their finger. And some participants would imagine working out and exercising routinely, and then they would imagine the results of working out and exercising. They would imagine themselves more muscular and so forth, and the others would imagine the inverse. And what they noticed was it was about a 23% increase in muscle mass in the finger and the hand or something like that for the people by just imagining it. And they were also asked to not exercise whatsoever during this experiment. And that was one of many that have been recently conducted, showing how important that is. And this is another good example of that. I'm not saying it's intuition or it's something magical, but it's definitely something worth remembering.
We call it. I agree with you 100%. And there's an answer to that. The one thing is how long does that muscle mass increase last for afterwards? That's an interesting one. And we talk about in our organization, we don't talk about lifespan or health span. We talk about Freudenspanne, which is the quantitative effects that the emotions have on the biomarkers of aging. So if you are thinking, oh, my fingers getting, I'm going to get Schwarzenegger guns or something, right? So then all of a sudden you think about it, yeah, you're not going to probably have 50-inch biceps, but you'll just have that little bit extra, and then it has a cumulative effect. And that's what we look at and how we work it. And you're right, it is still regarded as a pseudoscience. And the problem with that is that when you go out there and you start saying things like that, you're discredited. And so in actual fact, for the society as a whole, that's even worse, because then you have to have an uphill battle trying to get your point across. Like the guy that talked about sugar in the 1970s being really bad for you. He was discredited by the sugar industry, of course, for money. Well, it turned out that the guy was 100% right. Not even 100. It was so right, it was unbelievable. And now we're realizing, actually eating, red meat and stuff is actually good for you. Like the line in, I think it's the the Woody Allen movie where he's eating red meat. I can't remember it now. Sleeper. He wakes up 500 years in the future, and they all eat red meat and they drink vodka, and they're like really healthy for you, and they shouldn't be having sugar and stuff. And that was done before anyone knew anything about it. He just made it up. And not that I'm a Woody Allen fan, I'm not at all, but that's actually a good part. So these things are very interesting, that we need to be very careful about how we present it to people, because if we present it in a way that is too much for them to understand, and I don't mean that in any derogatory way, just because of knowledge issues, then they discount it, and then the damage is done. It's too late to really have an effect, if that makes sense.
Yes, quite interesting thoughts. Now, I wanted to ask a few questions that I think will help essentially illustrate some of the connections of your worldview to transhumanism. And the first question that I have is, what criteria do you use to distinguish fact from fiction, as well as likely from unlikely explanations for observed phenomena? How do you evaluate whether something is true or false?
Yes, so I am a big fan of the scientific method. I've probably made that pretty obvious here and there, but I'm also very receptive again to unknown ways of comprehending something, the sixth sense, telepathy, visions, dreams. I've had these experiences. I actually have information and knowledge that I gained through a dream or through a vision before, and then was able to research it and find out that it was true. And that's not even the most impressive example, because I know you could probably say it was a memory I didn't know I had. But yes, I do. I am a fan of the scientific method, but I also I love to, and I'm very excited by the things that are considered maybe like hermetic alchemy, and the somatics of things that we haven't had a chance to fully observe, dark matter and vibration forming matter, and the capability that we have as human beings. You know, how Tibetan Buddhism with transcendental, experimenting with transcendental meditation. And so criteria, I mean, I'm receptive to other forms of criteria. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how I want to answer that, but um,
Perhaps a better way to phrase the question would be, is there some set of, let's say, red flags or signals by which you would conclude that a particular proposition is false? So you said you're open to a number of possibilities being true. Is there some observation or result, or even a way that an idea is presented, that would lead you to reject it as being clearly false? So, for instance, if Alex Jones were to come on the air and say, well, the world is run secretly by a group of lizard people who call themselves transhumanists and they eat babies for dinner. And oh, by the way, they're also Jewish lizard people. So if Alex Jones were to say that, I would know that it's clearly false on a number of counts. Not least because Alex Jones is not a credible source, but also because what he's saying is obviously outrageous. And I'm intentionally providing like a reductio ad absurdum of the most ridiculous thing that I would consider to be clearly false. There are other
I love
propositions. Indeed, indeed. There are other propositions which are less transparently false, where you would need some physical evidence. Like if somebody were to say, well, eating gummy worms enhances your longevity, and I like gummy worms, by the way, I would probably think that's false. And I have a number of reasons to believe that's false, but I actually think that's a testable hypothesis that could be subjected to a controlled experiment. And I would be open to the possibility of that hypothesis being true, but I think it's really unlikely to be true. So in your situation, what would you say would convince you that something is clearly false?
yeah, now I realize the first way I answered the question was like so off brand or just so in another direction. I guess I didn't hear the question. Yeah, that's so fun. Yeah, I think the obviously, yes, consistency in results, of course, is important to me. But again, with sciences and things like that, it's more open-ended. There's a more, you know, uh, openness to other possibilities. But if you're looking at something like in a court of law, or especially biology and medicine, these things, obviously it's more imperative. There's more consequences if you get it wrong. It's important to have a very finite structure with how you conduct, and determine an end result, of course, by a certain timely manner. So we're talking about metaphysics and, astronomy. We're not really on this like timeline where it's like, oh my God, if we don't use the Hadron Collider by this time, we're all going to die, if we don't, figure this out. Whereas, of course, with my medicine and biology or in the court of law, there's a timeline and there are, very direct consequences. You have to say, okay, they need this surgery now, or you cannot take this medicine right now, or, you know what I mean? This has to be proven with, indefinite evidence, empirical evidence, and so forth. And of course, that's any wise person's criteria and the consistency. But when we're talking about, the human potential within technology or in transhumanism and the potential of existence and consciousness, yes, I do have a more liberal, less limited criteria basis that's flexible, I guess you could say. And so I do use some of the most fundamental criteria, that you use as well. But
Yes, thank you for that explanation. And we have some interesting comments. Alan
That was an
Crowley.
excellent answer. I love
Yes.
that.
Yeah, so Alan Crowley writes, my worldview has been destroyed. I joined the USTP so I could meet Madonna and Lady Gaga and hang out with the elites that run the world. Good one, Alan. Well, I actually think that pretty soon we're going to have singers that sing transhumanist songs that are better than Madonna and Lady Gaga, in my opinion. So you're in the right group.
Well,
But
we'll see,
we shall
or
see.
we'll hear.
Indeed, we shall. We shall. It is coming. It is coming in the not too distant future. But anyway, to follow up on my question, in terms of your worldview, do you have a specific creed or set of principles that you follow? Or is your philosophy or worldview, however you might call it, more open-ended? How would you address that?
So, and you and I have discussed this before. I do have a soft spot for traditionalism, which is, I guess very different than some of the goals within transhumanism and science. And this is also probably a node to my culture and upbringing. And I think that in
Hmm.
a lot of ways, strange merging of cultures with embracing and adapting to being sort of what Grimes calls homo techno. She's the artist and mother of Elon Musk's children. She calls us, so we're at the stage of homo techno, where we are just kind of merging from old world ways as homo sapiens to transhumanism. And it's a very weird sort of juxtaposed time for us, figuring out, when's the appropriate time to get married and have kids or not, because our resources are different, our survival needs are different, figuring out career choices, our lifespans are changing. And all of these things are sort of like more radical for us to determine. And I think there's been a lot of juxtaposition and conflict for people at this time regarding these things as they're changing. And I do have a soft spot for some traditionalism culturally. I was raised Christian, and I love being a part of that culture with my family. I don't want to argue with them. I just want to pray with them. I love them. I think it's beautiful. I think these things are really healthy. So that is definitely a part of my life. Another creed would definitely just be self-awareness, the philosophy of always being on the pursuit of self-awareness, whether or not you have a strong inkling or strong passion about philosophy and arguing and having these, big debates with scientists and philosophers. That doesn't have to be your personality, but just for health and happiness, I would recommend, really getting into your identity and understanding yourself and using different tools to do that, to look at the hand you were dealt and find the aces that you might have, because there's always going to be obviously some bad cards and some bad things that happen to you or will happen to all of us, tragic things. And it's to be able to identify your aces, identify yourself, and work on that, and always try to improve. Loving compassion. As a science community, when we think of love, we often think about oxytocin. We think about the neurological response. Where does it come from? What is love? We know that oftentimes it is oxytocin, because people that love you can do terrible things. But I also think on another scale, love as a vibration, as something beyond our comprehension, might be a life force, might be a more of a graduated place that we experience. That would take probably a whole other episode for me to talk about that. I guess that would, ancient cultures with, those theories. So yes, compassion, loving kindness, and just practicing that, and embracing more your culture, not trying to change your parents, not trying to change the people that disagree with you. If they're, obviously if they're standing in your way politically and legally from certain goals, it's a problem. There's always the politics, but at least in your interpersonal lives, for me, I think just that love and understanding and peacefulness. Peace is definitely one of my creeds.
Yes, peace is a good ideal to strive for. I have sometimes thought that, at least in terms of certain phenomena, namely family and aesthetics, the traditional norms are in many regards more stable and efficacious than what we have today. That is, the traditional norms worked, albeit imperfectly. I think in the transhuman era, whatever norms emerge are going to work quite well also. But we're in this messy transitional period where, especially in these areas of life, there's just a mess. And
Well,
I can understand why some
progress,
people want
progress
to.
through reason. We
Yes.
keep our reason and our logic through the progress. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And I think there are some people who just reject reason today because they think reason is old fashioned. So the neo Malthusians, for instance, are reacting against not just, say, traditional religious norms, but they're reacting against the Enlightenment. They're reacting against the Industrial Revolution. They're reacting against the progress that brought us these standards of living. On the other hand, what some people might consider traditional today was actually profoundly liberal and progressive back in the 18th and 19th centuries with America's founders, for instance, and creating a country based on a set of principles rather than ethnicity was genuinely quite progressive and groundbreaking at the time. Or the Industrial Revolution and the rise in standards of living that ensued was a genuinely progressive phenomenon. So I do think that we need to maintain a confidence in progress, but to some people that today might look remarkably conservative because we are preserving a set of ideas and approaches that have been around for a while now, but they're continuing to work their way through our society and hopefully still improve our lives, even though they're facing with resistance.
And
And yes,
that's the thing. We're going to have to decide what is human. Sooner or later, we're going to have to decide what is human and what isn't, and it's going to be interesting.
well, the Transhumanist Bill of Rights, I think, is a good start in terms of that discussion so that we can try to be inclusive and preserve what is valuable about humanity while also extending certain rights and ethical treatment to other sentient entities that may reach those capabilities of sentience. So I think this is a good bridge to the question that I think will interest a lot of our audience. And where would transhumanism fit into the worldview that you articulated? How would you essentially close that loop, so to speak, and bring all of the ideas that we discussed today back to or into transhumanism?
Yeah, so firstly, I think it's definitely succinct in the sense that transhumanism does aim to create more harmony within the human experience and the human condition by solving the problems within medical needs and catastrophes and um, things that are, dangerous and, you know, unjust and so forth. And so once we're able to, I think I said earlier, eradicate some of these problems that cause, illnesses and so forth. Like you said, if you wear glasses, you're a transhumanist. If you have a pacemaker, you know what I mean. And long ago we lived to be 20 years old. Now we're living to be 75. This is all due to that advancement, to that progression that we're continuing on. So I think that creating more harmony does part of that goal lies in the pursuit of advanced technology and advanced human production. But I do think that with my worldview, I sometimes wonder if if I'd like to see more people of science and particularly that are interested in like you said earlier, that we'll have singers that sing better than humans. We'll have the advanced transhumans singing better. And I sometimes feel nervous about these like fake art and fake, the AI generated art compared to someone who took all of this time developing this craft. And it's like they're a freak of nature. They can paint something so real. Like I love that. I don't want to see, the real technique of really training the brain and training your muscle memory to make art. I don't want to see that die. And to me, that's so beautiful. Like that's what's human, and that's beautiful. And I have those opinions, but I also think that uh, transhumanists with those goals of like advancing to have all these talents and just have supernatural like intelligence and so forth. Sometimes I wonder if we should focus more on solving the problems within health and longevity and accidents, making cars and planes safer, making medicine more thorough and so forth instead. And then in terms of like consciousness, and exploring consciousness and exploring what we're capable of learning and how we learn, and neuroplasticity and so forth, and how we apply what we've learned and so forth. I'd rather, maybe we should take more of an organic approach with that first and learn more about the unknown with that and the things that we consider pseudoscience with that first, and find our humanity in that, and be more open to hearing about the testimonies with near-death experiences where people who had dementia and so forth were suddenly lucid in their near-death experience. People that were blind could suddenly see, and explaining these things, and becoming more acquainted with that part of humanity and acquainted with this part of existence. And I wouldn't want to just like skip that part, like in the way that allopathic medicine sometimes gets that wrong, right? And just skips over, there's these other solutions. They say, oh, we'll just cut out her uterus instead, when really there was these like, other solutions to begin with. And I'm aware of the natural fallacies. It's not always true just because it's natural, it works. That's not true either. But, we see in Western medicine and allopathic medicine where we sometimes get it wrong by just going, we're just going to go to the machine, we're just going to use the technology, we're just going to do the surgery. And they bypass all of these details. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to put this together cohesively. I would like to see the same thing with, we're still in the dark ages about mental health and human potential with our brains, and understanding our neural architecture in some ways. And I would like to see us focusing on that more than the focus being like, oh, I can't wait to upload my consciousness so I can have all these skills and be so good at this and good at that. And but transhumanism ties into my life and my worldview, in the sense that I definitely view it as a solution for solving world's problems and world tragedies, and totally open to that, totally open to technologies to make bionic limbs and help people hear and help people see and help people live and be happy and healthy. And yeah.
All right. Thank you for that answer. And Jason says in our internal chat that he agrees with you, but he also likes cool stuff. So he's going to just keep making cool stuff. And one of these, let's say, cool creations that he has made recently is a song called Transhumanist Believer. You can watch it on his YouTube channel. And I would call it a human AI collaboration, because I understand that Jason wrote the lyrics and he put together the sequence of images and animations, but the voice is AI generated. So there are many potential creative endeavors where humans are still going to be significantly involved, but AI enables or amplifies our capabilities in ways that we wouldn't be able to attain otherwise, maybe because it's too expensive to hire a singer, for instance, or because there is a certain skill set that the unaided human faculty cannot attain. For instance, I have musical compositions that I created, that I wrote, but would be unplayable by human hands, because human hands don't have that kind of dexterity, or don't have that many fingers, or don't have that ability to, for instance, time gaps of 1/164th note between one part and another part.
Yeah, but I was able to do the machine to make it work, though.
Yes. Yes. So the machine
I
can.
didn't play it. I had the machine do it, though. I remastered some of his stuff, and I didn't play it on the machine. I had the machine do it. But go ahead.
Yes. The machine can actualize a vision that we might have, but we wouldn't be able to carry out using our unaided human faculties. And I think this is also a spectrum. So it's not going to be either solely man-made or machine-made. There will be intermediate stages as well, which I think will have a lot of human creativity involved also. So we are
every musical piece can be remade almost, well, not indefinitely, but lots of different ways. Every musical piece, So this idea that, oh, you're going to copy off me or what, art is supposed to copy off everything. That's the way it works, and it multiplies and becomes different. And there's so many different ways of the same song. That's
Well, my concern is a little more literal, and I hear you on that. But when we look at the brain and we see someone who's playing an instrument, we see incredible activity going on the brain. I mean, it's just the neuroplasticity that's being created, the new neural networks, the neurons firing together and wiring together from, for example, playing a musical instrument. I mean, it's outstanding. And if we are we doing ourselves a disservice when we're reducing something that to the idea of it's just doing it for us, when we're in the act of creating and we're in the act of exercising our brains and our motor functions to create something, and the discipline and devotion to carry that out organically, I think is very healthy for us. So I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying I can't enjoy AI generated art and music. I definitely am not trying to bring anyone down who's doing that. I'm technically, as an AV tech, using some of these technologies, in a technical sense. But I'm just afraid if we get to a point where that's so casualized and that we glamorize it so much that we've abandoned more of the natural processes for creativity, we might be doing a disservice to our brains. Because again, when we look at the neural activity of someone creating, I mean, it's amazing. It's very healthy for you.
It's true. I don't play my guitar as much anymore, and I probably play the guitar less good than I used to. So there's that.
Yeah.
Yes, so we have about 4 minutes left in our salon. I'm wondering if we could fit in one question from one of our viewers who is named Snakes, and he brings up this idea from William James, who was largely a 19th century, early 20th century American philosopher of the pragmatist persuasion. And he wonders, Amy, are you familiar with William James's evolutionary argument against epiphenomenalism? In Snakes' view, it proves that consciousness is fundamental and one of the forces of the universe. Have you come across William James's argument?
I'm not recognizing it by name, so I will definitely have to jot that down after this. It might be something that I remember, but no,
Okay.
thank you for that.
Yeah, so William James is interesting because he was the originator of the concept of pragmatism. That is, we don't so much focus on what is true metaphysically, we focus on what works in terms of consequences. So it is a workable assumption that we are conscious and that we have free will. And if we try to act otherwise, or if we try to treat other people otherwise, then we'll fail miserably. And I like to use the example of, let's say I wanted you to stand up from this chair, and I'm not actually going to do that, but hypothetically, one could engineer some sort of mechanism that would act on an atomic level to kind of reconfigure your surroundings to such an extent that you would involuntarily spring up from your chair. It would take a lot of time and effort, but it could be done. Or one could just kindly ask you to stand up from your chair and assume that you are a rational, conscious, volitional entity who could be persuaded to do that. What would work better? What would be more effective? So that's the pragmatist philosophy. And I think for all practical purposes, having the assumption that we are conscious and that we have free will is what works better to bring about the desired consequences. But we have about 2 minutes left in our salon. We like to leave our guests to provide the last words. So, Amy, what would you like to say in our remaining time to bring this discussion to a close?
Yeah, I would like to firstly say just thank you for having me, you guys, and thanks for listening. I am but a mere journalist. Those are my contributions, is listening and learning. So actually, thank you guys. I am not a scientist, clearly, and But and you know, in my own sense, I feel like I am. I like to say that. But yeah, I'm a journalist first and foremost. So I'm here to listen to you guys and see what you guys are up to and help spread the word and help cover you know, what's going on and disseminate information and hopefully be wrong sometimes. That's fine too. And I get to learn and get, you know, new exciting data. So yeah, that's all. Thank you guys. And
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. And certainly this was the kind of interdisciplinary conversation that I was hoping it would be. And we explored some fundamental philosophical questions, but also questions related to longevity, related to the mind-body connection, and perhaps how we can look at the world more broadly and maybe even hold out hope that in the future scientific evidence will emerge for some phenomena that might be considered more intuitive or more anecdotal today, that we would have more systematic rational explanations for those phenomena. We discussed a bit of art, we discussed a bit of history, a bit of politics even. So I appreciate the wide-ranging conversation as always, and this is what we strive to accomplish in our virtual Enlightenment salons. Next Sunday, January 28th, please join us for a salon with our friend Mike DeVerde and his Omni Futurists group, as well as David Wood, a frequent guest on our virtual Enlightenment salons. We will be talking about the economic singularity and how individuals and societies can become more resilient in the face of it. Until then, I hope we will continue to live long and prosper.